Hey folks, this is Jake from So We Flow, and you're listening to the Why We Move podcast. Join me as I speak with incredible movers from diverse disciplines to share their stories and give you practical and inspirational advice on movement and living a happy, healthy life. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, a fanatic or casual, these conversations are for anyone passionate about movement, their minds and their bodies.
No, it's keeping it simple. I think the more simple you keep it, the less pressure you feel on yourself and the less expectations that the people have on you. So I think I've learned that over the year with, the lack of posting on social media. Someone asked me that the other day that, you used to be really active a year ago. How come you're not active anymore? And I think it's just time is a big thing, and how you want to dedicate your time towards certain things is a big thing as well. And when it comes to spirituality and just mindfulness and self-awareness, I think there's a level of, I don't know, it's something that I talked to a couple of friends about, and a couple of my monk friends I've been hanging around with for the last 10 to 15 days. We've talked about it as well. And it's something that the West tends to struggle with, which is how do I balance out my internal practice with also helping other people out and helping them practice, balance theirs out. And if you don't take care of your internal struggles and your practice, it tends to leak over into now trying to show the people that you're taking care of it, if you know what I mean. Like you're having to, instead of just doing the actual work yourself, which is the dirty work, you have to kind of show the people that you're doing it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there's almost another facet to that as well, which is the kind of like the business side of it, right? Like whether for me it's an actual external business, or for you it's you as a business and what you teach. Like you can obviously do something on social media to educate out of purely wanting to share good information you have, but then there's also an interest for like, how do I get my next client? Like I want 10 more clients next month, XYZ. And I think that's a challenge for me because, for example, I'm much easier to post on my personal page, which is purely just about living a healthy lifestyle from my perspective and what I'm learning. I just feel I want to put that out there for people to potentially get something from it, because when I find that out, or when I realize that there's different ways of doing things or easier doing things, or the struggle is not real, whether it's like exercise, you don't always, this conventional things isn't the way it is, right? So they're the things I want to share with people. Whereas for So We Flow, I've actually taken a massive step back from social since Christmas. So on Christmas Day, I was like, this will be the last post for a bit of time, whatever that might be. And I've realized that was the thing that was kind of troubling me with social media. And I think the reason for that is that with the So We Flow social, I felt that it really linked to the income of the business. So I felt like it was almost this essential thing that needed to be done every day in order to generate income. And what I realized is that by just not doing it at all, one could argue that it's zero impact whatsoever. And that's been quite a liberating thing for me. And that's not to say I don't have a responsibility as So We Flow to share messages and nation brand, because I feel I do. And that is that I'll be focusing on when we reintroduce it, which will be soon. But I feel like I was locked in that pressure of it being a business thing.
I do understand where you're coming from there. It's quite difficult to, especially when it comes to mindfulness, it's quite difficult to balance it out, to balance business out with personal, and also your own personal practice. Because people will just say, well, the only reason that you're putting all these messages out there is because you're trying to sell your brand or sell your clothes and whatnot. And to be fair, to find a balance between the business side and the personal side, it does become quite difficult. And I think the way to approach it, the way I found it is whatever your message is can be transmutated in a way which is passed on to people, either through, I think if you've got this genuine message that you want to push through, and you're living by that, I don't think it gets clouded if you're also doing that with your business. I think it becomes a problem when the intention of making money becomes the first thing, the primary thing, and then your message comes second. I think that's when people start to say, okay, now there's a bit of discrepancy between what he's saying and what he's trying to sell. I think if there's complete transparency, and people know that in this lifestyle, in the choices that we make, we have to also make a living. And you're going to have to sell things, and that's just how it is. But I think I've learned from spending time with monks that as long as your product or your message is clean and clear, people will generally just throw money at you because they want to hear more from you. They want to get involved with your stuff. And also the main thing is they want to support you, because it's very difficult to find people that are like that these days. And I just think people, when they come across that kind of stuff, they are completely willing to support you in any way possible.
Yeah, for sure. How have you, having taken quite a lot of time off social media, how have you found that affecting sort of your clientele and everything? Because I imagine at points it has been a sort of people getting in touch with you.
To be fair with you, I think it's quite the opposite. I think there's been more of an increase of clients and stuff now that I come off social media. Because the thing with social media, I found, and I don't know if you've ever asked yourself the question, especially when you're going through the phase of it, when you're at the peak of social media posting, is, are you sending the message because you're trying to create awareness about something, or are you doing it because you're trying to show people that, oh, I've got this thing sorted out, or I've got this thing going on in my life? And I look through my social media feed, and I've started removing posts that are all about me. I've left the ones that are a lot further down that talk about who I am as a person and what I do. But generally speaking, as I've gone through 2020 to 2021, I've noticed that going through my feed, I've definitely changed the posts about me. And even on my stories now, if I post anything on my story, generally speaking, it isn't really about me, unless it's like climbing and just me having fun and goofing around. Apart from that, any serious messages or, clients training, it's usually about other people's progress and how they're doing. And I think if you sell the result of your product as opposed to you as the product, I think you tend to do a lot better. And I think, and it sounds like I'm selling myself, but I don't just mean in terms of making money, but in terms of selling your message, because that's basically what we do on social media. We're trying to sell our message. And it doesn't matter whether it's selling it through, because people say, then you're not really making money off the post that you're making. You might not be making money, but you're creating users and people that are viewing your stuff, which is, again, you're buying and selling. You're selling views and users. That's why social media call the people that use their products users as opposed to, consumers. So you're doing that. And I think if the message comes across that you're trying to push something that is beneficial to everyone as opposed to trying to tell people that I'm doing this and I'm doing that, then I think people are way more accepting of your message. So, for example, all the videos I used to post about a particular type of stretches or this and that was beneficial to other people. That didn't really have any benefit for me, but it was something that I found that helped my practice out. So I thought I might as well share it and see if it helps other people out. And as soon as people see that, they want to know more about it. And then from there, you get the opportunity to work with people and make money as well.
Just to sort of challenge that, not necessarily because I think it should be, but just to be like devil's advocate, people other people is right in every do kind of life talk a lot about like the things that they've gone through to are right. So
yeah,
let's go on a very practical level, right? I wasn't able to do X, and now through process of C, I can now do it. That's something, right? But as a viewer, you'd be, they were where I and they have got there through this certain process. It would help me to learn that process. What do you think?
That's an interesting question. Or an interesting thing, actually, because I think every single person hits that at some point. And you have to find the balance between I think there's a very fine line between showing off and actually showing the intention of, oh, I've gone through this struggle. Anyone else that's going through the struggle, you can come out of it on the other side and you can be fine. And I think, personally speaking, I think in the West, we kind of struggle between the two. What usually tends to happen, and I'm not trying to pick on anyone, I'm trying to point anyone out, but I think what I've noticed on social media, even just this time that I've stepped away from it, is I think we step into the category of, oh, I've gone through this, look what I've managed to do. And it starts off with the good intention of saying, anyone else is struggling through the same process, you can come out of it. This is how I've done it. Now, hopefully I'll help you out. It starts off with that. But then if you start to read the comments, this positive feedback loop where people are now saying, you know, good on you, amazing for you, amazing that you've gone through this, and it's amazing that you've come out of it. And then again, you're self-indulging because you look at that and you think, oh, that's making me feel really good. So I'm going to continue going into other things of my life and start to talk about those things. And then you almost lose touch with the initial message, which is, okay, the thing that's helped me out, the struggle that I've gone through, and the thing that's helped me out, how that hopefully will help other people out. But then now you're looking at trying to get some sort of gratification from people supporting you, or, you know, saying all their positive things about your struggle and how, you know, how great you are for getting through that. And I think you have to be very careful that you don't fall into that bracket. And I think it takes a certain level of self-awareness to be like, for a second, take a second to rest and almost reflect on whether that's happening or not. And I think that's something that you have to continuously do. I don't think it's something that you can just do once and be like, okay, I've overcome that now. I'm just going to push this message and hopefully people will understand it. Because all times you're always going to get new people. New people will always come across your content. So you're having to continuously restart and refresh and say, wait a second, am I now, again, self-indulging in the gratification of people telling me how well I am or how good I've been for going through this process?
Yeah, I completely agree, actually. I think choosing an obvious example, like posting a body, for example, I think it's also, there's two points of perspective. There's your perspective and the reason that you're sharing that. And then there's the perspective, right? So like, I fully 100% believe that someone, and I do it myself, can post a picture of the body and literally not consider that it's to show off. Like, even one, when I've done it, I can honestly say, hand on heart, there is not even 1% of me that is doing that to show off. Like, it has purpose to say, you can, you know, you don't have to calorie count, you don't have to restrict your diet, you don't have to be like smashing 2 hours out running every day to this. And it's almost seeing yourself like an observer's perspective. But then obviously there's the perspective of the viewer, right? There's someone that can go like, arrogant twat, do you know what I mean? Or they might go like, oh, he's worked hard for that, how did he do that? Or that message really resonates with me, I've been struggling so hard, how important it is to know that I don't doing it the way I've been doing it. I haven't really got a point to make on that, other than it is interesting how there's before that message gets sent out into the world, there is 2 points of perspective.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it goes back to, you're always going to get new people seeing your stuff. So the more you post on social media, the one thing you have to accept is your viewership is considerable compared to if you're going to talk to your local, you know, friends and this and that, and the people around you and your clients and whatnot in your local vicinity. I think when you go online and when you go broad, you're putting yourself, and you'll have to be willing to put yourself in the firing line for these type of comments. You're going to get people that say, well, this guy is just literally just showing his body off. And you're going to have to be willing to accept that. But then again, you have to go through the process of self-reflection and say, okay, am I now getting too lost in that vanity? Or am I actually still sticking to the original message, which is, I can do this. I live in proof that if you stick to this, and this is what will happen. And I've definitely fallen through that as well before in the past. I've thought, okay, now I'm posting these pictures. Am I doing it out of vanity, or am I doing it out of actual trying to say this is going to help? Because I've gone through just a couple of my friends' posts, and from the outsider's perspective, you can either take it one way or the other way. You can either see the picture and you always react to the picture first of all before you read the post. That's just human nature. You see the outer layer first, and then you decide that, wait a second, let me just see if what I'm seeing is exactly what's going on here. And then you read the post, and then you realize, okay, actually it's not. But then at the same time, it goes into, just again, to be devil's advocate, it can also go into, I've seen a lot of people that post, for example, they're having a bad day, so they'll take a picture of them crying or whatnot. And it almost crosses over into self-pity sometimes, which is, every time you feel emotional or you feel like you've got something that's not happening for you that's well, you're having to post about it to tell people that you're vulnerable. And I think with the culture that we're living in with mental health and all of that, it's almost used now as a scapegoat to try and say, this is what's going on in my life, this is what I'm feeling, instead of just saying, well, I've had a shitty day, I just need to get on with it. I don't need to really post about it. I don't need to do any of that. I just need to get on with it and actually only give the things that are going to be useful to people. And maybe one post in a while that will, something big that's happened that you may find that will help other people out to deal with certain situations. So for example, a breakup or so a loved one's passed away and you feel like how you dealt with that may help other people out. Fine. Then you're providing that message. But that kind of stuff doesn't happen every day. So it's one of those things where you have to find you have to find a good balance between, am I now self-indulging or am I providing, again, the right or correct message?
Yeah, sure. From watching a few of your recent podcast episodes, and obviously what we're talking about now, Chet's podcast is called Conscious Conversations, by the way. Social media's played a big part in those episodes as well. Like, it came up. Why do you think it's something you feel the need to talk about? What's the issue for you? You're trying to potentially educate people about when it comes to social media?
If you look at the current generation and how the world is going, now the introduction of TikTok in the last 2 or 3 years, I remember reading an interesting article that was talking about a study looking at most kids' attention spans. And now this whole 10-second generation thing has come out where TikToks are like 10 to 15 seconds and immediately you're moving on to the next thing. It's becoming more and more difficult for people to stay grounded. And it becomes more apparent that people are now comparing themselves to other people across social media as we get further and further down this social media generation. And it's quite scary. And obviously you've just had a child, and you're going to have to go through the process of deciding when is the right time for my child to be given a phone, or when is the right time for my child to be given access to social media. And most parents I talk to these days are reluctant to even give their kids a phone, which is probably at the surface level, it sounds like the right approach. But then again, you've got to understand that with the world moving towards technology, if you don't teach kids how to use these things, then the kids are going to miss out on a massive amount of their life. Mm-hmm. Because if everything is moving digital, you're going to be left behind if you don't adapt to those times. And you just don't want your kids to have to go through that experience. So it's having to, again, find the balance between how much social media indulgence you want to introduce them to and how much of it is now going to turn toxic. And I think the process, the right way to go about this, and again, speaking to my monk friends about this, is to be able to adapt with the times, but to be able to also give them and make them understand who they really are, in terms of allowing them to understand who their real identity is. And through Eastern practices and obviously yoga and stuff, it's believed that you're not the mind or the body, you are the soul. So if there's this practice that I do, and it's something that I do with the kids in my local temple, that we normally get together on a Friday and we do like a youth presentation or youth activity session. And I teach them to, with this, it's just a very basic meditation practice that takes away all of the sensations from the body. And you start to realize that, there is a level of separation between your body, your mind, and your soul. And as long as you're aware of the separation, and as long as you do have that separation, then anything someone says on social media, or if you look at comparisons and you say, okay, I don't feel like I'm pretty or good looking enough, and I compare myself to other people, you start to realize that, well, that's just there's a separation between who I think I am and who the other people see me as. And as long as that exists, you will tend to pass through all the social media problems without any issues or any hiccups. And I think that's my sort of issue with social media, and my sort of also, I have a positive spin on social media, and I think it can be used for the right reason. Like the stuff that you're doing, sending the correct messages and things that will help other people out. I think that is the correct way of doing it. But it's how you're going to teach consumers, which is the newer generation of kids coming up. How are you going to teach them to interact with social media?
Yeah. Just at risk of sounding really passive about all of this, do you honestly think it's possible to truly teach kids to be able to disregard those desires to want to emulate other people, to be other people, to feel lack of self-worth? Because I think even grown adults will experience that for their whole lives. I think kids take things very black and white unless they're super intelligent. Although I can even think of a few kids that I know who have been brought up in a really holistic, like wholesome way, which you would never think they'd get sucked into that. And then you see them a year later and they're screaming because they got their phone taken away, and they're like obsessing over someone on Instagram. And it's like, these companies have made it so addictive, genuinely like using magical knowledge to do that. And in a pessimistic sense, I do wonder if it is even possible to teach someone that, just having to experience and just do it.
That's a very good question, and it probably requires a lot of time to create like a plan, or create like a system that you can implement to help the kids out. I've spent time with the Hare Krishnas in there's a temple in Watford, the Bhaktivedanta Manor. It's the one that was donated by George Harrison back in the 70s and 80s. And it was 4 or 5 days I spent with them. They had a week program going on, and it was this thing called a Be a Monk Challenge. And you spend time with them. You live the life pretty much as a monk for an entire week. You wake up early in the morning, you do your meditation, you do all this. And then in the afternoon, you're doing your chores. So you're milking the cows, or you're feeding the cows, or you're picking vegetables and fruit. And then in the evening time, you're doing a lot of selfless service. So we were feeding the homeless and these sort of activities. And through that process, I remember looking at the young kids that were there, and I was having a conversation with a 10-year-old there. And it was such a fascinating conversation, because I was just thinking, like, the way he was thinking, the way he was talking is something that's from our parents' generation. So not from our generation, from our parents' generation, which is a generation without technology, etc. Even though he's got an iPhone and he's using it, the way he was speaking and the way he was speaking about how his approaches to life is, I just thought that if he could do that, and if the kids that he's talking about and he's hanging around are exactly the same, then surely they've got something that we are missing. Mm-hmm. And I think it comes from, we probably shouldn't use this word because it's usually used negatively, but it comes from conditioning. Conditioning, and also how kids are brought up from a young age. Now, if you think about it, we are giving our kids to strangers, like teachers and the schools that we are sending our kids to. We're giving our kids to strangers in the most pivotal part of their lives, between the ages of 3 to 10. So in that time frame, the kids' minds are very malleable. They've not made a concrete sort of definition of what they see reality as. After the age of 10, they start to see the world in a particular way, and then they start to build their own ideas and beliefs and systems, and then that dictates their life from that moment on. But in that pivotal period, if certain practices or certain things are taught in a way, and you've done it in a way that's allowed them to see both sides of the equation, for example, for social media, these kids are exposed to social media, but it's only for a very brief period of time, in the latter part of their in that time frame. So between the ages of 9 or 10, they get introduced to social media. But before that, they have no social media whatsoever. They're living a very, very strict, disciplined lifestyle. And some people may say that that's taking away their freedom. But then that can go into another conversation of what freedom really is. We can talk about that later on. But when I saw him and the way he was speaking about it and how he's interacting with the kids and how the kids are responding to him, I just found that you can tell from what he was talking about that these kids just weren't exposed to social media. And then when they were, they understood what social media was. So they don't overly indulge in social media, and they've already got a certain level of discipline to realize that, okay, if I go this far, this is what social media can do and what it is. So how much do I want to take it? And you were talking about just adults, not just kids, but in the adult periods of our lives, it's very difficult to now go back and reverse the ways that we've seen the world. So my approach is to try and target the kids young. And if you're focusing on the kids that obviously have now gone from the ages of now got beyond the ages of 10 and now in their teens, how do you approach their approach to social media? I think you have to almost have to cut it off. You might almost have to teach them another lifestyle. We know that when we were kids, we used to play with bikes and balls and this and that. I think as an adult, you have to take the time out and you have to almost sacrifice your work life to be in a situation where you can teach your kids other parts of life. And you have to almost take the responsibility of doing that. And if we have to do that with adults, we have to do the same thing there as well. We have to almost take the adults out of their situation and tell them, look, there's another way of living life. I think this Be the Monk challenge thing that I went to was doing exactly that. It was taking me out of my current life, and the basic stuff was taken care of. My food, my shelter, my basic needs were taken care of. So then I can focus on other parts of my life. And I think we have to almost create that environment for these individuals if we want to create a healthy relationship with social media, or if you want to reverse the effects of social media on people that have had negative effects.
Absolutely. I was really interested in the fact you said conditioning, because when you were sort of talking before then, I was kind of thinking you might say that word. And I was actually thinking my own experiences and how the way we deal, use, react, feel about social media is so complicated. It's not as straightforward as going, this is social media, like this is what it does, because it's accumulation of like all our experiences and us, how confident we are, our self-worth, like how much drive we have to better ourselves. Because my own experiences, like obviously, like we didn't grow up in the sort of Instagram, Facebook days, but when we were young, it was more like MySpace, that kind of thing. And there were points where I was like super sucked into that in a kind of toxic way, because when you're going through puberty and stuff, you do feel a lot on yourself, you're a lot harder on yourself, and you do kind of aspire to be these people that appear to be successful in whatever regard that is. But nowadays, through no tutoring, so to speak, I do feel I find social media inspiring, if and nothing else really. Don't get me wrong, like everyone, there's always moments where you have a bit of envy, jealousy, perhaps, maybe a bit of I wish I was. It is very fleeting, and I think teaching kids to use social media for inspiration is one of the simplest things we can do, like an everyday person can do, or a parent can do, because there is a lot of amazing, wonderful, inspiring things on social media. And before, we would have never been exposed to all that. And I think using that as fuel to take kids to these places that there's no limit to what someone can do nowadays. And a lot of, in our, like, say, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, what we did with our lives was very much limited by what we knew and what we were exposed to. Nowadays, we're exposed to everything. And, one could argue that is a negative thing, but you could also, it shows people all these possibilities. And I think, like I said, if a child can use that as fuel to propel them in the direction they want to go, I think that's an amazing thing. That being said, the brain is a complicated thing, and we are susceptible to falling down that path of, I can never be that, I want to be, this person's better than me, all these, and I will never have, and this kind of thing. Yeah.
No, it's a very interesting point. And going into the stuff that we're talking about, so I think schools may need to take this approach. I know that schools are now going towards teaching kids how to code from a young age, which is very important because obviously as we move down this technology age, that's going to be vitally important, just as much as maths, English, and science. I think there's going to have to be a completely different subject for social media. I think they're literally going to have to sit there and teach kids what are the positive effects of social media, what are the negative effects of social media, and what is the healthy balance of how to interact with social media. Because if you think about it, what you were just saying there about MySpace, I remember my first interaction with social media properly was Facebook. After I was just using MSN messages just to message my friends, but it was Facebook. But I never really got addicted to it because I never saw the point of it apart from messaging people that you haven't talked to in a long time. That was it. I think I was just fortunate that it wasn't really a massive thing I was consuming. The one thing I was consuming a lot was YouTube. And I think YouTube's approach to social media, as much as the ads are annoying and all this stuff that's on there, YouTube's approach has been way more healthier than any other platform. Mm-hmm. YouTube's content has gone from short, really memey sort of clips and people goofing around to these long form conversations. These podcasts that we're doing right now, we wouldn't even thought about it 10 years ago when, podcasts weren't really a thing, and long form conversations were a thing. But then people started to realize that actually, the world wants to consume long form media as well. It's not just short form conversations. We want to hear the whole conversation because we know that when we hear short form bite-sized news, it can be taken out of context. We've seen that with just modern journalism and modern media and stuff. So people want to hear more about other people's experiences and also other people's expertise. You want to know more about it. Like, for example, someone like Jordan Peterson has become massive because his lectures and all his teachings have been very important for young adults and stuff. So I think people will consume social media in a positive way if the approach is positive. If it's a negative approach, if you know that your product or what you're selling is a complete duff, it doesn't even work, or there's no backing behind it in terms of actual practicality, and you're just selling it because you're going to make money off it, then you're going to have this very, very negative effect on people. And I think there hasn't been boundaries set for social media. People can get away with anything on social media, mm-hmm. and it can be positive. For example, this is my problem with social media. There's too much censorship on things that are important, and there's not enough censorship on things that aren't important, which I think is very unhealthy. Where, for example, on Facebook, I can watch a video of a man having his head decapitated, but yet I can't watch a video of a person giving a speech about things on the right wing side of things, and I think that's wrong. I think you should open up social media to everything, but at the same time, you've got to be careful that it can also be used for other purposes as well. But I think that's the risk of social media. You can't have it one way or the other. And I think what's happening in today's generation with the whole cancel culture is companies, especially Twitter and all these big Silicon Valley companies, are censoring two sides of the argument. So they're giving one side of the argument and they're being biased towards one side and not giving the other side of the argument. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we have to also be careful of. And we have to teach our kids both sides. If we teach them what the bad things are on social media and the good things are on social media, they're going to find a much healthier relationship. And then whatever happens later on in their life is obviously down to them. We've done our part, which is to try and support them as much as possible and tell them that social media isn't bad if it's used for the right purposes. But then afterwards down the line, they'll have to go through their own experience to understand who they are and who their identity on social media is as well.
Yeah, and I think that's further sort of bolstered by the confirmation bias of the algorithm. So whatever you're looking at, whatever you're interested in, even if you don't have to type anything in, it's just from clicking on something or spending a seconds on something, you get shunted more and more of that sort of stuff. So before you know it, everything on your Instagram page is this thing that you've been looking at. They know what you're interested in before you even know. And because you're getting fed all that, like you said, there's two sides to the story, right? I know you were talking political, but there's two sides of diet, there's two sides of movement, there's two sides of whatever it is, right? And the more you start researching, for want of a better way of saying it, one side, or you get pushed that way. And I think if we are talking about the very stereotypical toxic social media, which might be like super attractive, fit people, or it might be like skinny women with loads of makeup and plastic surgery or whatever, and young girls are going on this, and the more they're looking at it, the more they're seeing it, till the point where they think that is literally the world as it exists, when it might be a 0.0001% of reality. And it can really, even to an intelligent adult, it can really skew your perspective of the truth. And I think we're seeing that now with all the political extremism that we're seeing just in every country, really.
Yeah, 100%. And I think going from what you're saying there, it's we just basically need to be aware. As an individual, you have to be aware of the echo chamber that you're surrounding yourself with, even the friends that you're surrounding yourself with. I think it's vitally important to have a diverse group of friends, not just culturally and not just, not the surface level stuff. I'm talking about really deep rooted sort of ideas. You need to surround yourself with those kind of things. Because I've got friends that are not into any of the stuff that we're into, like the mindfulness and the yoga, etc. They like to indulge in partying and doing this and that, but there's still a level of conversation I can have with them, which makes me see a different side to the equation. And it's nice just to have that. It's always nice to have that person that's saying, well, you're doing this and it's great that you're doing this, but there's also this path as well. And there's this path. And you can also look at that in a very positive light as well. So if you're someone that, not to say this is wrong, but you're continuously doing something repetitive over and over again every weekend, and you find yourself not really finding joy from that, and you've got someone in your life who's very mindful and is doing things that are a bit more grounding. I think that can be a massive, massive perspective shift for that individual that's struggling. And I think from there we develop very close relationships with particular ways of thinking, because it's not just about how you feel as an individual. It's about what is happening around you, and it's how you're also affecting the people around you as well. And I think different views will always help solve most problems. There's more tolerance towards having more people telling you their perspective of life and their approach to life as well.
Yeah. This kind of just came into my head now, but it'd be interesting to get your perspective. But do you think the fact that we do, the world that we live in, the digital world particularly, does create this echo chamber? That's potentially one of the causes of so much conflict between people. It's because when people do come across paths that have created these echo chambers, and it's a bit of a shock to be like, my world isn't this person's world. How can that possibly be? And I guess the natural way is to act in a, what's the word? Not necessarily aggressive, but in a defensive way, in a way of like, oh no, this can't be the truth. Like my way is correct because all the evidence that's been pumped to me through everything I'm looking at supports what I believe.
Yeah. So with that, it goes back to identity, what you identify yourself as and who you identify yourself as. So the most typical example we can use is football teams, how strongly people identify themselves with particular football teams and how aggressive they become in that environment. I worked for 3 years as an event security person, and I worked football games. And I remember thinking that when I was working in a football game and I saw the aggression between two sides, as soon as they left the space and they're outside again, as obviously after once the game's over and everything's done and dusted, everyone's back to normal. Everyone's going to the pub and everyone's just having a good laugh and no one's taking it seriously. But as soon as you enter that vicinity, that barrier, you automatically become chimp mode. And my good friend who's a doctor and I were talking about this the other day, which is the chimp paradox. Yeah. You almost become a chimp straight away. That primal instinct kicks in, and you're now defending things that don't even mean anything to you if you look at it at the grander scheme of things. Like you supporting Manchester United or you supporting Liverpool doesn't mean jack all. It just means that when you're in that environment and you're watching this game, it adds to the intensity and the entertainment of the actual thing you're doing. But if you see it as that, then there's no issues. If you don't identify yourself as a United fan or Liverpool fan beyond just that environment, then there's no problems. It's when you start living by that, and that now becomes your identity. So going into what we're saying, I think the approach is to sit still, which most people can't do, is to literally just sit still and try and figure out who you really are and try and peel off the layers. It's figuring out who you are is quite difficult. Let's do the opposite. Try and figure out who you're not. So you're not labeled, you're not identified by the labels you wear. You're not identified by the products you buy or the things that you watch. You're not identified by the things you associate yourself with. And as soon as you start to peel those layers off, then things start to become a lot looser, and then things will not affect you in the world as much. And I think that's a very Eastern approach to things. Our goal in life is not to become someone. Our goal in life is to become no one. And it's something one of my good friends, Darshan, learned when he went to spend time. He did a lot of shadowing monks for a good 3 years. He was on and off shadowing monks. And one of the common monks, that's a good friend of mine, told him that you've come here as someone. Your goal is to live here as no one. And he said he thought about that every time he went there because it didn't make sense to him, because he thought, I was coming from being nobody in the world to now trying to become someone, like trying to become controlled, trying to become equipoised, trying to become basically monk-like. So how does that make sense? And then as he spent more time there, he started to realize that actually these guys are continuously working on themselves, peeling layers off, trying to get rid of the ego. And I think that becomes vitally important, not just as a monk, but also as a human being, as a householder, as we say in Hinduism. Like the lifestyle that we're living is a householder's lifestyle. We want to get married, we want to have kids, we want to get involved in worldly affairs. That's our householder duty. And I think we need to follow that properly by taking away and peeling off the layers that don't really, resonate with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that I've always tried to practice in my own life. I think in a slightly different form to the way you've described it, or like the stoic approach. But when things arise, whether it's a volatile situation or like a reaction, just catching yourself and taking that observational sort of view of the situation, free of all these ties of things that we think we are or that we believe. And I've always found that to be a really powerful way to try to be a good person, for want of a better way of saying it. I did actually find that to be bolstered once I started practicing yoga, just to bring yoga into the equation. Not that it needed to be, but I think that's when I really became aware of that trait. And I'm not sure what that, maybe like you say, that was the sort of the ability to sit still and be within myself and observe what was inside my head and what was the thoughts that were passing through. I would say that is very likely what did sort of reinforce that and make me aware of that ability to do that. I think when I've been practicing yoga for probably like 6 months when I was in Morocco, that was when I first started really intensively practicing. And I came back and people would ask me, oh, what have you been doing? I've been like, oh yeah, I'm really into yoga, X, Y, Z. And they'd be like, oh, what have you learned? And I think the main thing I used to say was, I feel like I have time in to react because I can step away from it. And yeah, I think that's really relevant to kind of what you were saying then, and being able to do that is such a powerful skill to nourish.
Yeah, if we're speaking of yoga right now, and I think that's a really important conversation to get into. So what you're saying there is, through the practice of yoga, you've allowed yourself, or by the side effect of yoga, you've created separation between what you think you are and who you really are. So there's a part of you where when you're just about to react to something, there's that tiny bit of separation. That's all you need. to realize that actually I've got a moment to decide how I want to react to this. And I think if you listen to Sadhguru, he talks about this. He goes, there's a difference between reacting and responding. There is a very limited way of reacting to a situation, but there's an unlimited way of responding to the situation. So it's how you respond to a situation, which will really test you as a person, because you sometimes might go into a situation where you react to it and then you walk away and you go, why the hell did I react like that? Like, what really brought out that situation where it made me react in that way? And I think from that practice, you start to really, really try and understand who you really are, and it starts to peel the layers off quite easily. And I think what I want to go into is with yoga, the reason why that happens with yoga, there's nothing fancy about yoga. You know, the practice of yoga, those physical postures that most people associate yoga with in the West, there's nothing fancy about that. That's basically a very small part of the yogic practice, but it's one thing that a lot of people universally can do. If you can get rid of any of the tension of the body, it creates the right space for you to sit still and meditate and be in your own thoughts. If you've got bodily tension, so for example, if you've got low back pain, how am I going to get you to sit still and meditate? You're never going to be able to do that. How am I going to get you to slow down your thoughts? You're never going to be able to do that. So by spending time in these postures, which are designed to release tension in very specific areas of the body, you create enough space and almost tranquility in the body to be able to think about things that are a deeper level that are affecting you. And that's why yoga, it does so well for so many people. But at the same time, it's the discipline of yoga that also brings those benefits, which is what you said. You did it for 6 months straight. It was the discipline, the continuous practice of doing it. And I think discipline and sacrifice are a big theme in the Eastern approach. This is one of the reasons why fasting, and not just fasting on food, but fasting on other areas of your life, fasting on speech, so not really talking so much, just being in your own head, fasting on water and stuff like that. There's so many different types of fasts. I think it's important because it creates a separation between what your general habit is and this identity on who you are. So if you're continuously binging, I would say binging as well, which is going to sound really weird from what I'm going to say now, binging 3 meals a day, continuously on a repetitive pattern, you're not giving yourself the space to realize, actually, am I just continuously doing the same thing over and over again? And is it becoming a mental thing? Am I just doing this now because I'm actually hungry, or am I doing this because it's just become a continuous pattern? And again, if you create some space between that, you start to realize, actually, I'm not that hungry. Why am I eating 3 meals a day? And I've got my meals down to, I would say, 1.5 a day. So one breakfast in the morning, I have a bit of toast, homemade toast with peanut butter. And then I don't eat for between 8 to 10 hours. And then I eat an evening meal. And again, it's just nothing too intense. It's just something that will digest very quickly in the body. And then I'm good to go. And it's allowed me to reduce my sleep quota from going from 7 to 8 hours to now 5 to 6 hours a day, if not less than that sometimes. And it's allowed me to become way more disciplined with my practice.
How is what's your physical exertion been like going down to that sort of style of?
I still do all the stuff that I normally do. So I still train, I still climb. I climb a lot more now than I've ever done in the past. So in terms of how it's affected me physically, it's probably increased my productivity even more, because I realized that sleep is not what we really need. Sleep is a big part of rest. Rest is what we really need. If you think about it, you can sleep 8 hours and still feel like shit the next morning.
Yeah.
So why does that happen? Well, because you haven't really, it's not the sleep that you desire. You need rest. Rest comes from going into REM sleep, entering the REM state. Now, if you're spending 6 hours of that sleep and you're not entering REM sleep and you're only spending 2 hours, you're going to wake up and you're going to feel like shit. So it depends on how much you're resting. And that goes into so many different things. So diet is a huge part of it. What are you consuming and how quickly is it going through your system? If the food you're consuming is lingering in your system, so we say in the Eastern way, there's 3 categories or 3 modes of living. There's tamasic, there's rajasic, and there's sattvic. And most foods that you're supposed to consume are supposed to be sattvic. So things that digest very quickly, that come from the ground, that come from very organic sources. So grains, fruit, vegetables, etc. Those kind of things that when you consume, they digest in 15 to 30 minutes. Those kind of things are what you want to primarily have your diet around, especially if you're going into like mindfulness and spiritual practices. They recommend those kind of diets. And then the Rajasic foods are the ones that are full of passion. So spices, chilies, these things that have a little kick to it. Those are the kind of foods that go into that category. And then finally, the tamasic ones are foods that cause more inertia in the body, things that are slow digesting, that take forever to digest. For example, meats, fishes, eggs. Those are kind of foods. If you're consuming those and your diet's primarily based on that, you're going to find a lot of lethargy, and you're going to find that you're going to have to rest a lot longer. For example, if you look at when tigers hunt a meal, they will fast for 8 days before they have another meal because of the lethargy of breaking down that meal. So they'll have a gazelle or a deer, and then it'll take them 8 days of just meandering around, just lying around until it's digested, and then they'll be active again. Why does that happen? Because that food takes a lot longer to digest, even for a carnivore. Carnivore's digestive system is designed for eating that type of food, whereas ours is, I would say, more of a hybrid. It's not there to eat anything that's too complex, and it's not there to eat anything that's too simple. But I mean, if you go towards the simpler side, it just makes things easier, and it makes the process a lot quicker. But I would say you have to find a healthy balance between what your lifestyle dictates. If you're someone that's doing heavy labor, so you're lifting things and you're throwing things around, then yes, you're probably going to need to take things that are a lot more slow in digestion. But if your lifestyle doesn't really support that, and you're doing things like, for example, office work, or you're sat down, or you're doing yoga practices, or you're teaching stuff, I think you're better off with a lighter diet that requires less stress in the body or inertia to build.
Interesting, really interesting. So you haven't, how are you finding getting like the nutrients that you require into such small meals throughout the day? Have you had any issues with that? I know it's always like micronutrients is always something that's quite hard to really feel, especially like in a short term. Have you had any experiences with do you take any supplements for that, or are you just kind of rolling with it for now?
Funnily enough, I've removed all supplements. I used to take protein shakes, vegan protein shakes, but I've realized that, I'm not a big fan of liquid diets. And that might not be for everyone, but for me, my system prefers solid foods. If I have a liquid diet, I tend to be a bit more lethargic, which sounds very contradictory, because you think in a liquid diet, it would speed up the digestion process because it's just liquid, there's no breakdown. But I've just felt from the response I've got, it just causes more tiredness and slowness in my body. So I've gone from, and it wasn't really conscious, I just think I did it for climbing first. I wanted to cut down on a couple of pounds, because obviously in that lockdown, we weren't training as much because all the gyms were shut. So I thought, what's the point of me eating 3 meals a day if I'm not training as much? So I cut down to 2 meals. And then from there, I started to reduce the amount of supplements I was consuming because I wasn't training as much. And then from there, I wanted to cut down a couple more pounds, because if you're lighter when you're climbing, you're going to be a much more efficient climber, and it's not going to take that much energy. And then after that, that's where it's all gone into sort of mindfulness now, because I've realized that actually my body's feeling a lot better being 5-6 kilos lighter than it was before. And I'm not feeling like I'm having to maintain a certain level of activity as well. So now my activity is just, my food's based on how much activity I've done in the day. So if I feel like I've trained today, I'll eat according to that much training. And if I feel like I haven't trained today, then there's no point, because all I'm going to do is end up storing that as fat. So in terms of macronutrients and micronutrients, I don't really track much. I just go by how it feels in the body. If I feel like something is not settling well, then I probably won't consume it. And if it's sitting well in the body, then I'll continue to consume it. And I feel like I'm not really attached to any particular type of foods. I have a very simple diet. So peanut butter and 2 toasts in the morning with a bit of yogurt, and I have a bowl of mung beans that are sprouted. And that's pretty much it in the morning. And then in the evening time, I'll have some rice and dal. And then on top of that, I'll have the mung beans again and a bit of yogurt. And that again will be my second meal. And that's pretty much it. And that's pretty much what I live off. And it's enough for me to to go through life and continue to do what I love doing, which is training and climbing and stuff, and also teaching. It keeps me mentally, alert when I'm teaching my clients to make sure that they're getting everything out of me. And see, the last thing you want to do is, run around and eat whilst you're in that process of teaching and this and that. It just doesn't. I think it causes more grogginess and slowness in the body. For me, anyway. I don't know how other people feel, but I just feel like mentally, I'm just better off teaching people whilst I'm fasting and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I typically fast every day, probably around 16 to 18 hours usually. Right. Until recently, it was very much more on the 18-hour side, and I'll explain what's changed. So, I just first wanted to say, just because I found this one of the most powerful things for sleep that I've ever done, and I've been doing this for a couple of years now, but dinner super early, so typically kind of like 5 o'clock, finish eat, last bit of food in my mouth will be at the very latest 5:30.
Right.
And for me, it's been revolutionary for sleep. And I think that's probably got a lot to do with what you said about like adequate time for digestion and not conflicting with sleep. I think cutting night eating out, for whatever reason, whether it's to do with like the circadian rhythm, whether it's to do with digestion, I think is one of the simplest but most powerful things people can do. And it's not necessarily stopping eating at 5:30 or 5. Like that's obviously quite early for dinner, but it's not that piece of chocolate at 10 o'clock. It's not having that packet of crisps at 9 o'clock. We might be talking 6, we might be talking 7, but those few hours before bed are precious to ensure that, like you say, we're talking about it's sleep, not sleep quantity. And that is one of the easiest things people can do to improve that quality of sleep, as well as like reducing the digital stimulation in those late hours.
Yeah, 100%. Like from what you're saying there, you're going by what the body is wanting. And if you look at the rhythm of the body, if you're just sensitive enough and you pay attention to what's going on, you'll see that around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that's your peak time of digestion. I can feel the secretion of the acid in my body around that time. I can feel it because you feel this really, really light bit of cramping in the body and in the belly. And you can feel something is just starting to produce. And that's why I feel every time around 12 to 1. And then as I come towards the latter part of the day, I can just feel myself slowing down. And I know that the digestive system around that time, it's said in Ayurveda that the digestive system after 8 o'clock, 8:30 tends to be a lot, you need a lot more energy to try and break down the food compared to 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So I think if we go by what our ancestors were doing, we're pretty much not going to go wrong. I think after, obviously, all the commercials and the food industry and how they push towards particular diets and eating small, 5 meals a day, etc. All that is basically for selling foods and making money off it. And I think it's just all a pile of crap. And I think, again, a lot of people have made results from that. But generally speaking, you'll notice you'll have less problems in the body if you still have this window of fasting in between. And as long as your last meal is before, I would say 8 o'clock, maybe latest. Sometimes I have to go at 9 o'clock because I finish late. Latest about 9 o'clock, and you're giving yourself 2 or 3 hours before you go to bed. You're probably going to have a decent quality of sleep. And even that latter part, you have to question what kind of foods are you eating. If you're having fruit and vegetables, let's say you get a craving at night time to eat, I think the worst thing you can eat is something like crisps or something that's really, deeply fried or it's hard to break down. Even breads are quite difficult as well. I would say go light. If you have fruit, most fruits digest within 15 minutes. Yeah. I think the bananas and apples are the exception. I think they take about 45 minutes to digest, if I'm not wrong. But if you have those sort of things, it's a lot better. And it's going to reduce the amount of inertia produced when you're trying to sleep. And chocolate is, like you said, it's probably the worst thing to consume before you go to bed. Chocolate is a stimulant. It's almost in the same category as caffeine, but not obviously, it doesn't give you the same buzz, but it still gives you some sort of buzz, and it causes, especially dark chocolate. If you have that before you go to bed, you're probably not going to get the best quality of sleep.
Yeah, I'm just laughing because I always eat dark chocolate before bed. But when I say before bed at 20 past 5, most people haven't even got home from work by then.
So it's a different story.
It's the last food that goes in my mouth every day. Some 90% dark chocolate, but it's definitely not in the traditional sense. Looking like 4 hours before bed. But yeah, for me, the reason, going back to what I was saying about reducing that fasting time and actually increasing the amount of meals I'm eating per day. So I was eating 2 meals per day. Granted, a lot bigger than the meals you were eating, and I kind of eat. I eat in a more sort of paleo style, I would describe it. So, but very much the key thing being whole, unnatural processed foods, both plant and animal, and as high emphasizing quality. That's how I eat, and I found really works well for me. Kind of moderate protein, low to moderate carb, and high fat, I found is really effective for me and gives me massive energy, satiety, zero cravings, like completely in tune with how my body feels. And what you said about the digestive enzymes starting to get produced, I feel those feelings as well. And until I started eating this way, I've never really been able to be in tune with that and feel so in control of my natural processes. Anyhow, I've recently, well, when I say recently, in the last few months, I've taken more of an interest in sort of functional weighted movement, so to speak. So for the last 10 years, my practice has very much been yoga with like kind of a bit of calisthenics. And recently I've taken a lot more interested in kind of more compound movements, still stuff I'm doing at home, but with like kettlebells, like more weighted calisthenics. And my yoga practice very much intertwined in that. So back when you said about, the physical part is just a tiny bit of yoga, and it's actually creating this space to sit and be with oneself. I feel you can do that in any kind of practice. I do some high intensity calisthenics thing, and then my yoga practice will me just being able to sit for minutes afterwards. Like it's not what it used to be. It's not go and do the Ashtanga sequence for an hour and a half anymore. That's not what my yoga practice is. But what this means now I've taken an interest in this training is that my calorific needs are much, much better. And I was trying to sustain what I was doing on these 2 meals a day, and it just was not possible to feel what I was doing with those 2 meals, or at least I just did not feel good from it. And I know you are as well, like day to day, a very active person. Like I basically tend to get up in the morning, and then I won't even sit on a chair until after dinner. Like it'll be dinner time will be the first time I sit down. I know I'm sat down now, but an anomaly. But desk, I'll go out for like at least an hour walk every day, split up, run errands, just pottering around. So I'm running on a lot of energy. Yeah, basically couldn't find that. I found that 2 meals, I just could not fit in the nutrients that I needed into those meals. So now I'm actually eating probably 3 meals and a snack. I've never really believed in the notion of the kind of classic fitness 6 meals a day kind of thing. And I've definitely not gone to that extent. I've been much more like, I'd rather do 2 meals a day. And I've been that way for a long time. But now I'm doing that, and I feel only been doing that for about a couple of weeks, and I feel like equilibrium has been restored. So I do think it's so important that people find their own balance, and they don't say if they are trying to lose weight or what. It's like you don't have to feel like it's a struggle all the time. Like there is an equilibrium to be reached, and there is I think a lot of the time people try to always see it as how like it's a punishment to go less all the time, when sometimes more might offer you more benefits because it'll give you the thirst to live with energy and dynamism and be more active and have that cognitive ability as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about, seeing it as a punishment, doing less. And that's the definition of discipline, isn't it? Like, you do less, and it's also sacrifice. You sacrifice something, you sacrifice your taste buds, your ability to taste all these extravagant foods, and you decide that I'm going to eat in such a controlled way. I think true freedom comes from that. If you truly are seeking freedom, there's a level of sacrifice you have to make in your life to be like, okay, I've done this for so long, I've indulged in this, now I'm not finding the same amount of joy, so what can I do? So cut down on it. You have a lot more appreciation for things when you don't continuously eat the same thing over and over again. So cut down on the stuff you're eating. And the second thing I wanted to go into is Ayurveda says that the more you stress the digestive system, the more you speed the process of aging. So if you think about a battery, if I continuously use the battery over and over and over and over and over and again, and I keep using it at 100% capacity, so I recharge it, get it to 100%, use it, recharge it, and then use it, continuously go through our cycle, eventually the battery will worn away. We know that by our phones. The average phone, their battery, the capacity of the battery decreases by, I think it's 15 to 20% by year 1 and year 2. There's a reason for that. There's only so much charge the battery can use if you're continuously going to use it. And obviously you're using it for that purpose. You're using it so then you can be active on your phone. But in the same way, if we're continuously stressing the digestive system in that way, continuously doing it with more and more complex foods that are, requiring more energy to digest, you're just speeding the process of aging and death. And the second thing is, adding to that, the foods that do that the most, funnily enough, are proteins. Proteins take a lot longer for the body to digest and break down. And it causes more and more stress in things like the liver. And we hear people, for example, bodybuilders have got knackered livers because of the amount of protein they consume.
Plus the steroids.
And I think, what's that?
Plus the steroids.
yeah, basically. It's well, not just, to be fair, not just the steroid the users, it's also normal people. By the age of 50, 60, their liver's knackered, obviously from alcohol abuse as well, but protein is a massive thing as well. Like, too much protein is poisonous to the body, according to Ayurveda, because at the end of the day, we don't have a storage component for protein in the body. We have a storage component for carbohydrates, we have a storage component for fats, but none for protein. Protein is used for repairing the tissue and muscle and stuff in the body. That's what it's used for there. That's why the muscle size increases, because we're continuously breaking it down and repairing it. So continuously consuming protein will stress the body at a level which will age it a lot quicker. So our whole point of life is to try and stop these from happening, or minimize the amount of stress in the body, minimize the amount of stress in the mind as well, because that also causes problems in the body. So I think, naturally speaking, when it comes to the intake of protein, I think the studies say you don't actually need that much. You need between 0.82 to 1 gram or 1.5 grams of protein per, I think it's kilo of body weight. Yeah, so if you're 70 kilos, so if you're 70 kilos, you pretty much need about 70 grams of protein. And most of it, you'll probably just shit out, because you don't really need all that. And I think it's the misconception here is that for the last 20 odd years, the fitness industry has been pushing this idea that, protein shakes, this and that. And really, it's just been all a fad, because at the end of the day, I've seen climbers that have their diet consists of Oreos and maybe a bit of weed and some, on the odd occasion, some alcohol. And that's their diet. So they'll climb for like 8 hours, have an 8-hour session, and that's all they eat. But you look at them and they're jacked. And you wonder what's going on there. And I was looking at this and I was telling my students about this. There's this concept called, I don't know if you've heard of the prison concept. So when a prisoner goes to prison and then you see them a few years later, depending on the hostility of the prison and how dangerous the prison is, you'll see they'll become jacked all of a sudden. Yeah. And bear in mind, these guys are eating 3 standardized meals a day. They don't get any variety. They get the same crap 3 times a day for the time that they're serving. And for some reason, a few years on the time that they're in prison, they just become jacked. And people couldn't figure out what was going on. Are people smuggling enhancements or whatnot? Maybe that's happening. But if everyone's getting to the same level, then surely that can't be the case. It turns out the environment that you're in will dictate your genetic response. So we say, I'm not genetically built for muscle, but if the environment requires that, the body is an adapting mechanism. It's there to adapt at all situations. So if you're in an environment where other individuals are jacked and that is a very intimidating environment, you're going to also become the same because your body wants to survive in that environment. And it thinks the best way to survive is to become that same size. So you get these scrawny little criminals that go into prison, and a few years later, they're jacked as hell. And that analogy also applies to the climate analogy that I just mentioned. These kids are eating crappy foods, and yet they're becoming massive and stacked, especially the girls, absolute beasts. So it just shows you that this whole concept of protein and whatnot, yes, if you can get your nutrition down to all the clean foods, you're going to get a better response from the body. You're better off eating clean foods compared to eating Oreos. But generally speaking, you're still going to gain the same amount of size as long as your environment, the activity you're doing requires you to become that size. So if you're continuously climbing 8 hours a day, 3 times a week, you're going to become bigger. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Same as if you're doing other forms of training. So I think it's more to do with your activity level, what things you're doing and what things you aren't doing as well. So if you're lacking in sleep or you're lacking in certain areas of your life, then your body's just going to respond to that sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, I back in the day, I was definitely one of those like protein bros for sure. But I haven't had a particularly high protein diet for a long time. And I think that is really supported by research now. There's quite a lot of studies out there showing that high protein is probably worse than very low protein. I think one of the exceptions and definitely one of the merits of a higher protein diet is for people that really don't have control of their body weight, their hunger signals, emotionally in any kind of eating disorder, because protein is so satiating and it doesn't send you on that insulin roller coaster that a refined carbohydrate diet might. And I think for those sort of people that are struggling with the weight and do feel like they are ruled by food, I think even if it's just to get themselves in control again, a period of a high protein diet is a very useful tool for them to kind of reset the body and reset their ability to read their body's signals.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for a certain period of time, if you're someone that's struggling for certain things that you're trying to control, then the high protein diet does really help. So I don't think there's any wrong way or right way of doing things. It's all about, I've just learned in the last 2 years that it's just all about what kind of lifestyle you're living, what kind of person you want to become, and what kind of life you want to live. And that's pretty much it. If you go by those 3 things and you base your diet, your choices in life, your not just your job choices and whatnot, but also your emotional choices, your social choices, the type of people you're hanging around with, and all the things that you're doing. If it revolves around those 3 questions, you'll probably, generally speaking, will live a pretty satisfying life, because you'll realize that, well, I pretty much did exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to accept whatever consequence it is, whether it's a good consequence or a bad consequence for your decisions, then again, you're living a very conscious, mindful life.
Mm-hmm. I think that's showing more and more. The more we see people using different methods, whether it's lifestyle approaches, exercise approaches, diet approaches, all reaching the same place, it shows, rather than going, my way's the right way, this way is wrong, I think it just shows that all of these ways can work, given that we're don't eat shit, basically. Move your body naturally a lot. It doesn't have to be intense. It can just be, don't be sedentary, don't eat shit, and take care of yourself and rest. I think and whichever the way about that, I think isn't as important as making sure that they're the purpose of doing each of those things, because we have seen that there's so many different ways to get the same goal, really.
Yeah. But also, if you're someone who's practicing, this is just purely for the people that practice yoga, if you're someone who's practicing the physical sides of yoga, try and get into the other areas of yoga, because again, this physical side of yoga, as great as it is, and as beautiful as the practice is just the entry level. You're just finishing your degree. So when you finish your degree, it doesn't mean you know everything. It just means you've just started, your actual career or whatever you studied for. So use that as your entry level. Allow the desire to seek more take you into other areas of your spiritual practice. And it's just something I feel like the West tends to lack in the yogic practices, is to keep seeking more. There's nothing wrong with desiring more. The problem comes from what you're desiring, and is that desire going to cause self-indulgence or self-harm? And I think spiritual desires always lead to breakthrough moments of reality, and you start to realize that actually my idea of reality is just completely being shattered. Now there's these other forms of things I can go into, and that's what the purpose of life is to kind of seek more. Once you've taken care of all of your basic needs, so everything we've just talked about in today's podcast, once you've taken care of all your basic needs and you've also become aware of what are the pitfalls and also the positives of certain things that you're doing, for example, social media, you're interacting with, then you're in a really, really, really rare instance of inquiring more and finding out more about who you really are.
Yeah, man, amazing. I think that's a great way to wrap this one up. There were so many things I wanted to talk about with you, but I reckon we just do this again in a few months. I definitely wanted to talk about, I think in particular, I was going to say something about how you obviously have this practical strength conditioning kind of based tutelage, but at the same time, you're in a incredibly spiritual guy interested in these kind of like higher levels and tradition. And I think that how you ended up in that place and how they play off on each other is definitely a good conversation for next time.
Yeah, I'll be down for that for sure. Maybe we'll do it on my podcast. So we'll do part one on your side, and I'll just do the part two, because it adds to how Craig and I usually talk about anyway. We the stuff that Jake is talking about here, we've already gone through most of the things. Well, I say most, but I was probably about 2% of the things that are there to talk about. And I think that's where the fascination is. I think the West is really, really obsessed with yoga because of this whole mysticism that comes from the East, and how these monks are carrying themselves in a certain way. Like, I'll be honest, like I've been very, very, very fortunate, just to give your viewers a brief glimpse of what we will probably be talking about. But I've been fortunate that throughout my entire life, I've been surrounded by monks. So I've been given teachings by monks. So I've had both sides of the equation. I've got the lifestyle of the West, and I've also had the lifestyle of the East. And for a period of time, I was leaning towards the Western lifestyle, but then I realized it wasn't, a large portion of it was fine, but it wasn't bringing me this deep satisfaction of joy and purpose. And as soon as I went back to my ways, and I started actually practicing a lot of the things, instead of just reading about it, actually implementing it into my life, it was a completely different perspective, a shift. And the way I looked at life was completely different.
Amazing, man. Well, I can't wait to have that conversation at some point soon. Well, cheers, brother. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and hopefully this podcast will do you well.
Oh, cheers, brother. Take it easy.
Thank you.